We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We love Great Britain. We love its history, its culture and its tradition, and that's why we're so proud to be part of GB News.
You look genuinely emotional. Oh, come here.
GB News does pay attention to those who are ignored by the mainstream media. The majority of this country whose forefathers fought and died to maintain liberty, to fight for freedom of speech.
The rule of law, the rights of property and democracy. This is the heritage that our country should be so proud of.
Which of course includes our Christian heritage. There's been a huge resurgence in the number of people going to church. Perhaps they're not finding what they're looking for, and they're looking for something a bit deeper, a bit more truthful, a bit more akin to Britain's Christian heritage.
That's right, get ready, because the most exciting night in general election history starts now!
Welcome to Friday Night with me, Matt Goodwin, right here on GB News, the People's Channel, where I speak up for you, the forgotten majority. Coming up on tonight's show. Despite an almost 80% fall in net migration since the post-pandemic surge, asylum seekers continue to represent 44% of all net migration into Britain. It's shocking.
Mine will be a budget for growth.
And the budget was delivered this week, and there doesn't seem to be any growth at all. Rachel Reeves is under fire and has been accused of conjuring a 20 billion black hole out of thin air. That debate is raging tonight. We're going to be debating exactly what has happened and whether Rachel Reeves has misled the country in just a couple of minutes.
David Lammy is ripping up this ancient part of our constitution.
And Justice Secretary David Lammy wants jury trials to be reserved for murder, rape and manslaughter cases only. Does that put too much power in the hands of a few judges? We'll be debating that tonight also.
And we must take all necessary measures to ensure the removal of any alien from any country who does not belong here or add benefit to our country. If they can't love our country, we don't want them.
And President Trump has halted immigration from what he calls third world countries after an Afghan migrant shot 2 National Guards, killing 1. Should Britain follow suit? We'll be debating that tonight as well. Now, I'll also be joined tonight by my panel, political commentator Alice Grant and GB News contributor Kai Wilshaw. But as ever, I want to know your views as well. You can reach us at gbnews.com/you'll say. Of course, you can reach us on X at GB News. But now it is time for the news with Sophia Wensler.
Matt, thank you. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your top stories. Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride is calling for the Chancellor to resign. It comes as Rachel Reeves has been accused of misleading the public by making the country's economic situation appear in a worse state than it really was in the run-up to the budget. A letter from the Office for Budget Responsibility, published today, revealed it told the Chancellor as early as the 17th of September that the projected £20 billion black hole would actually be much smaller. Downing Street denies Miss Reeves misled the public about the state of the finances. Elsewhere, Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff has resigned following an anti-corruption investigation. It's after his apartment was raided by Ukraine's anti-corruption agencies, and Andriy Yermak said on social media that, quote, "From my side, there is full cooperation." The Ukrainian president has now announced a reshuffle of his presidential office as a result of Yermak's departure. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has responded, saying Kyiv is gripped by a deep political crisis. Some breaking news now. Airbus has issued a major recall of thousands of its A320 aircrafts after a flight control incident. UK passengers are being warned of potential travel disruption after the plane maker identified a significant number of A320 planes impacted by a software issue. In a statement, the plane maker said analysis of a recent event involving an A320 family aircraft has revealed that intense solar radiation may corrupt data critical to the functioning of flight controls. Airbus has consequently identified a significant number of A320 family aircrafts currently in service which may be impacted. Now, the US is poised to recognise Russia's control over Crimea and other occupied Ukrainian territories to secure a deal to end the war. That's according to the Telegraph newspaper. It's understood that Donald Trump has sent his peace envoy, Steve Witkoff, and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to make a direct offer to Vladimir Putin in Moscow. The plan to recognise territory which breaks US diplomatic convention is likely to go ahead, despite concerns among Ukraine's European allies. Meanwhile, the US Department of Justice is upgrading charges for the Afghan man suspected of shooting and killing a National Guard member and wounding another to first-degree murder. It comes after the president paid tribute to 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom as highly respected and a magnificent person. She was one of the 2 Guard members shot on Wednesday. The other National Guard member, Andrew Wolfe, who was attacked, remains in a critical condition. The suspected gunman is also in a serious condition. And public figures who've been affected by prostate cancer have spoken of their disappointment after mass screening for the illness was not recommended for use on the NHS. Sir Chris Hoy said he's disappointed and saddened by the recommendation. Former Prime Minister David Cameron and actor Sir Stephen Fry were also among those speaking out against the decision. Those are the latest GB News headlines. I'll have more for you in an hour.
Well, welcome to Friday Night with me, Matt Goodwin, on GB News. And it is a Christmas miracle, apparently. Net migration has fallen. Britain is finally back in control. The Labour government is celebrating. Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood is practically glowing. But when you look past the glossy headlines and you look at the actual numbers, I think that optimism begins to unravel. Just look at what we've discovered this week. Asylum seekers now account for 44% of all net migration into the country, and that share is expected to climb. This week, the Office for National Statistics released provisional long-term migration figures for the year ending June 2025. And yes, the overall story is that net migration has fallen from last year's extraordinary figure of 649,000 to about 204,000. But let's be clear, 204,000 more people coming in than leaving every year is still an immense number, and a number that is far too high, in my opinion. The reason it seems low is because last year's total was one of the highest in modern British history. Now, this drop just resets us to the post-Brexit baseline, while we are still adding the equivalent of a city the size of Portsmouth to our population every single year. Just think about that. The new data also shows that roughly 3/4 of all migrants who are now coming into Britain are coming in from outside Europe, from radically different nations with radically different cultures. And this is reshaping the nature of the country and our population. I think much of this inflow of people entering, much of it is low skill, low wage, with low levels of education. And of course, that's putting unbearable pressure on our housing, services, and of course, our communities. Large numbers of people, especially young, skilled, highly educated Britons, we've also discovered this week, are packing their bags. They're heading abroad. It's been dubbed the brain drain, and that exodus explains a significant part of the dip in that headline net migration figure. So let's be clear here. Let's be clear about what's going on. Immigration remains close to record highs, and the only reason net migration is coming down is because many of those departures are soaring. And who can really blame them after Labour's budget this week? Why would Britain's brightest 20 and 30-somethings stay in this country when they're expected to bankroll an overstretched migration system and an increasingly fragile justice system through eye-watering taxes, all while their own living standards steadily erode? It's a difficult question to ask, but it's a question we really need to think about. Asylum accommodation has ballooned by nearly a quarter since the Labour Party came to power. We now have 108,000 asylum seekers living in hotels, bedsits and multi-occupancy housing, all of which is funded by you, the taxpayer, at a cost of about £15 billion. Now, the costs are absolutely staggering, and they're going to rise and rise and rise. And enforcement, we also learn, is not faring any better. The number of small boat migrants who are actually removed is declining under the Labour Party. Only 2,852 were deported, which is fewer than before Keir Starmer took office. In fact, get this is the bombshell number for me. Since 2018, under both Tory and Labour governments, our country has removed just 3.5% of those people who entered Britain illegally. Just 3.5%. Isn't that a shocking number, a shocking indictment of the British state? And of course, today we learn that French police are reportedly set to begin intercepting migrant boats in the Channel following months of disputes with the UK over the risks of such operations. But is it really going to make a difference? I think the blunt reality remains. Workers in Britain are being told to shoulder ever higher taxes to sustain a system that is now buckling under demand, while public services strain and long-promised reforms, particularly to welfare, remain out of reach. Well, to discuss and debate all of this, joining me tonight is political commentator Alice Grant and GB News contributor Kai Wilshaw. Kai, if I could just start with you. The net migration numbers on the surface, Shabana Mahmood celebrating, they've come down to 200,000. But as I say there, if you look at the detail, net migration from non-EU countries is still 385,000, a huge influx of people from outside of Europe, and lots of Brits, young Brits, leaving.
Yeah, well, I don't think actually Shabana Mahmood should be celebrating, because what this encapsulates, I think, is what we already know, and why I keep telling people, have some patience with this government, right? Because this new figure is the result, if we're honest, of some of the good work started under the Tories. And now Shabana Mahmood, only 2 weeks ago, went even further, unveiling those sweeping reforms, changes to who can access indefinitely to remain, what crimes disqualify you from that, rightly so, reforming the ECHR. I think you'll be quite surprised, actually, Matt. It'll be quite sad to see all of you with egg on your face when actually she succeeds in stopping the boats, as many in reform think she might.
I don't have egg on my face. I think those of us in the common sense majority who have been saying mass uncontrolled immigration is completely out of control, I think we are winning the argument. I'm going to come back to you in a second. Alice Grant, what's your take on these net migration numbers?
Keir Starmer was elected on the mandate to smash the gangs, and since then, this has just grown out of control. What I think we fail to remember often is that there are people who come here legally, through safe routes, properly, doing all they can to come here through the right way and the right method and the right procedure. This is so deeply unfair, not only, of course, on the British taxpayer who is funding hotels for these people who come here illegally, but also for people who actually want to come here to contribute positively to our society because they want to be here in Britain contributing with their skills. What about legal migration? I mean, it's so astonishing to me that after decades of such government lies, we have another government which are clearly going to do nothing about it, and their only solution is increasing taxes.
Well,
so deeply unfair young people.
Kai, there is something in this about the social contract. We've had the budget. We're going to come on and talk about perhaps Rachel Reeves. She might be in bigger trouble than people tonight realise. I mean, she's all over the front pages of the headlines, front pages of the newspapers for misleading the country. We're going to debate that in a second. But there's something here about the social contract, right? You look at these net migration figures. There are clearly lots of young Brits in their 20s and 30s who are looking at this country and saying, well, you're giving me the highest tax burden on record, the highest tax share for GDP on record. You are, if you're earning the average wage in London, we discovered more than half of Londoners are now going to be dragged into the 40% tax rate, meaning they're basically spending more than half of their income on tax, or half of their income is going on tax. I mean, then they're looking at Dubai, they're looking at Estonia, they're looking at Italy. OK, they're looking at lots of countries that seem to be much more favourable and that aren't asking them to subsidise massive amounts of migration, which is also a net fiscal drain.
Yeah, no, Matt, your focus and your priority being on migration always is so interesting, because actually
it is the top issue.
The reason why the Henrys, the high-earning but not rich yet, are leaving this country is because they're shouldering the massive welfare burden, which is only going to increase. We found out from the OBR this week that that's only going to increase. And no politician is brave enough actually to say, as well as those out of work, actually what this budget fails to do is go harder on wealth in this country, those who accrue capital simply in their sleep, and the older generations who have benefited from inflated asset prices, inflated house prices, and they get to go away with a triple lock, now almost quadruple lock pension. Yeah, sure. How is that fair when students are still paying exactly the same amount of inflation on their student loans?
My point, Kai, is it isn't fair, and that's why so many young professionals are leaving. It's not only migration, but it is also about intergenerational unfairness. I agree, I think that is a key point.
The cost of migration fails comparison.
Your peers, 20s, young people getting up and leaving saying, look, actually, it's not really, this contract doesn't make sense for me anymore. Do you pick up on that in your life?
I can't say I've not felt that myself, if I'm completely honest. But on the subject of welfare, the biggest effect of uncontrolled mass migration on our country and on our borders is the pressure on our welfare system, on housing, on the NHS. The reason why we are in this situation is because of a domino effect coming from literally uncontrolled open borders. We've had this policy now for decades, so I don't think you can talk about the welfare state and issues with funding and the depreciation in the value of public services without being honest about the reason for this, which is an open border policy.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it is certainly an issue that is going to not go away. Kai, when you look at the other aspects of the net migration, the thing that I pointed to is the amount of net migration that's coming in from outside of Europe. So if you take all the data we had this week, 75% of all migration into Britain now is coming from outside of Europe. So I'm talking about places like Pakistan, Nigeria, Bangladesh. Now, typically we talk about this in terms of the economy. We never really talk about migration in terms of culture. What does this mean for the country? We are importing lots of people, let's be frank, from countries that have radically different cultures to our own.
Yes, that's somewhere where we can agree on. And as you know, I've said that part of the problem with the left is that not only they've not grasped the scale of the migration right now, which is different to before, but also the kind of migration. And you are right to say that. And what these asylum reforms did is grasp the nettle on one of those issues, right? The scale of the migration that we've seen, especially when it comes to asylum seekers, the impact of the backlog, where they're being housed. What there's a bit of a skittishness still on, and a squeamishness to talk about, is culture.
Yeah.
Because it requires the left, and I've done a bit of this work myself, to sort of reflect on some of the things that we assumed about migration, that it is a positive across the board, and that all types of migration is good. And I think Labour will come to the position that that's not the case.
Alice Grant, we also saw an expert from the Oxford's Migration Observatory this week basically say openly in the Times that the economics of mass migration don't really make sense anymore, and that we now have a policy of migration that is not conducive to strong economic growth and to prosperity. Now, for those of us who have been making this argument for a while, it's good to have members of the expert class with us. But the reason they're saying that is precisely because of what we see in these figures. Lots of low-wage people, lots of low-skilled people. I'm not attacking the people themselves. They want a better life. But because they're working in low-wage jobs, often Deliveroo, takeaway drivers and so on, you know, they are a net fiscal cost to the British taxpayer and to the economy. So when are we just going to get real and say this model of migration that Boris Johnson gave us, that the Labour Party then mainstreamed, this model doesn't make sense anymore?
It never made sense, Matt, and that was because mass migration only benefits one type of corporation, and that's the big multinational organisations that want to benefit of cheap, available labour and really take advantage of people who are desperate. Because only when you're in a desperate position, you take these sorts of jobs which are so low paid, which are dangerous. And in fact, we've also seen, reported very recently, lots of people experiencing a lot of high crime rates to do with delivery drivers or people who deliver parcels. These people aren't really contributing very well, even in the jobs that they do.
Okay, let's just
astonishing.
Thanks, Alice. Let's just quickly. Two things are going on here, right? 8.5 million people on welfare benefits of working age. Nearly half of them have no requirement to look for work.
Yeah.
At the same time, we are running net migration, bringing in basically equivalent to a city the size of Portsmouth. How do those two things sit with the left today?
Well, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I think we've had years where any shortages in terms of skills, in terms of key sectors, we have partly filled because it's easy through migration, but also filled because there is this culture of worklessness, and you meet some people, and I have met plenty of people recently who live in families where there's generations of worklessness. It becomes a choice, and you fall out the habit. I've done that myself when I was a freelancer. I would happily sit at home and watch television.
But why is Labour enabling that? Why is
but we're not enabling it. We're not enabling it. Now, yes, there's obviously more to do. I think it's a failure of leadership that the welfare reforms didn't go through to the extent that they did. I hope that actually this budget, which seems to me to have tided Rachel Reeves over, might mean that eventually she gets to do a few more packages to sort out the welfare budget.
Just briefly, Alice Grant, before we go to break, if you look at the numbers this week, we are going to be spending, brace yourself at home, £400 billion on welfare by the end of this decade. That's in a year. £400 billion. I mean, it seems to me that what has been created, it's not even a national welfare state anymore. It's an international welfare state that is not only subsidising people who are not working, but people who, to be frank, are not even from this country.
No, exactly. There are so many foreign nationals who are going to be benefiting off our welfare system, which is grossly bloated. The point is, I don't think you can blame British people for not working hard enough for this crisis, especially when we have a government which is all too ready to just inject more money into the system and keeping people on benefits.
OK,
we need hard work.
Well, thank you for that, Alice Grant. Now, a Home Office spokesperson has said, "We are furious at the level of illegal migrants and asylum hotels in this country. It's why work is underway to move asylum seekers into more suitable accommodation, such as military bases, to ease pressure on communities across the country. Public safety remains our first priority. We are working closely with local authorities, property partners and the local community as we transition away from using hotels." Well, Rachel Reeves tonight, this is happening right now. She is under fire and has been accused of conjuring a £20 billion black hole out of thin air. It could be, actually, that this is going to get very, very serious for the Chancellor very, very quickly. We'll talk you through it in 1 minute.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk now?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
The fact is Trump made a good start, no.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up?
About 10. So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
There's a lot of tables out there that won't just have turkey on it. There'll be turkey and ham, and but I know some people that will cook 3 or 4 different meats. And obviously the joy of having turkey is that you can then make a turkey curry for Boxing Day and the subsequent days. So, you know, you should be having days of curry after your turkey lunch. I think for the masses, it's still hugely popular. You know, through the festive period at the Dog, we will have hundreds of people having Christmas parties, and most of them will order our turkey lunch or dinner. And then Christmas Day, we could sell it probably 3 or 4 times. The demand for people to go out for the traditional turkey roast is still massive. But hey, look, if you don't like a roast lunch, then why force yourself to have it on the, you know, probably one of the most important meals of the day in terms of bringing family together.
What about Sophie's point, Mark, about cost and spending £30, £40 on turkey? That is simply too expensive for lots of people.
Yeah, I'll never be able to defend or debate that. You know, I know more than anyone the challenges around food inflation, and a good turkey has become a huge cost. But I still think where people can afford the tradition, the joy of coming together, sharing a big turkey roast meal it's a brilliant Christmas tradition. But yeah, the food inflation, that's something we've talked about a number of times, isn't it? You know, it's crippling our business and it's crippling people at homes. I suppose the key thing to look at is if you know what you're doing with it, a good turkey will feed the family for many days. It's not just one meal.
GB News, the People's Channel.
You want to know what's really going on in the corridors of power? Labour don't know what to do with you half the time, and that makes you quite lethal in the chamber. Get behind the headlines with Chopper's Political Podcast. Join me, Christopher Hope, as I sit down with the great and the good of British politics. We'll see where this ruling takes us. These are the stories shaping our nation. Chopper's Political Podcast, available now on all platforms. Listen in and stay ahead.
5 hosts, 5 opinions, 5 fearless debates, 5 unfiltered takes on the day's news.
5 reasons not to be anywhere else on Saturday night.
This is the Saturday 5. You got me. You got me good there. Britain's biggest Saturday night TV show.
It's not a bad brand.
Yeah. Uncensored.
Very, very racy tonight.
On the unpredictable.
What did she say? Can you translate it for us?
And always entertaining.
And how can a country go from being led by William Wallace to Saturday nights from 6 p.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You're going to want to stay tuned, trust me.
Welcome back to Friday Night with me, Matt Goodwin, on GB News, the People's Channel. Now, Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride is calling for the Chancellor to resign after Rachel Reeves has been accused of misleading the country with a newly published letter from the Office for Budget Responsibility revealing that it informed Rachel Reeves as early as September the 17th that the projected £20 billion black hole would, in fact, be far smaller. Downing Street denies any wrongdoing, but Rachel Reeves is facing mounting pressure tonight and, of course, over the weekend after these fresh claims that she misrepresented the state of the UK economy and, of course, used much of that representation to justify sweeping tax rises. This comes as new voting intentions from the public reveal that if a general election was held tomorrow, only 18% say they still have faith in a Labour government, not even 1 in 5. Britons say the budget is unfair and unaffordable, in one of Labour's worst ratings since 2010, with most feeling no better off despite the government dropping its income tax plans. Well, to discuss all of this, I want to speak to City Editor of City AM, Simon Hunt. Simon, just talk us through this unfolding scandal tonight. I mean, if you read the Times, if you read some of the newspapers, if you look at some of the commentators on X this evening, there are lots of people saying actually Rachel Reeves might end up having to resign over this.
Well, it's a bit of a strange state of affairs because, of course, a couple of weeks before the budget, Rachel Reeves gave this unexpected speech in Downing Street. It was quite an alarming speech in which she hinted that the state of affairs of the UK economy was worse than she had anticipated. That was highly unusual in 2 respects. You know, one, that these sorts of speeches by chancellors just before the budget don't normally happen. There's normally this sort of quiet period before they do. And second of all, you know, chancellors and governments in general tend to talk up the health of the economy. They tend to say things are going well and aren't we doing a great job? So it was quite surprising. I think there's a lot of head scratching as to why she did this, given that as it turned out, the figures that she'd been handed by the OBR several weeks earlier actually exhibited signs of a much healthier economy than she had hinted at.
Simon, even the Institute for Fiscal Studies, a very well-respected, rigorous, reliable institute, even they have suggested that the Chancellor has essentially been lying to the country about the state of the country's finances. Do you agree with that?
I mean, it's hard to say because, of course, in the speech itself, she didn't reveal the precise state of the economy. She didn't exactly set out what the numbers were that the OBR had given her. Instead, she sort of hinted at it. There were sort of, she was pushing people towards the idea that there were problems in the economy without explicitly saying so. So she was certainly skirting around the truth, to say the least. I think in terms of why she did this, it's sort of hard to say, but the most obvious explanation is a sort of expectation management for the markets. This government would appear to be very scared of the bond markets, the markets that determine how much it costs to borrow. And so maybe her plan was to make things seem as worse as possible, give the worst possible interpretation of the picture, so that when the real figures came out come budget day, things looked a little better than they were, and the gilt markets would relax a bit. That's maybe what her thinking was. Whether that was reasonable to do and whether she misled people is, I suppose, a separate question. I mean, certainly it panicked businesses. I think businesses found that a bit of an alarming speech. You know, people maybe made personal finance decisions on the back of it. So I think while maybe the gilt markets were pleased in the end this week after the budget, there'll be a lot of people who are quite upset.
And just lastly, before I turn to our panel, Simon, do you think that actually Rachel Reeves is going to end up going sooner rather than later? I mean, there's a lot of this. Yes, she may have placated Labour MPs for now, but you look at the polling that we've had over the last 24 hours, it is absolutely disastrous for the Labour Party. We've had one poll with them on as low as 15%, you know, trailing the Greens. It doesn't look like they are going to be turning this around anytime soon. You look at the data that came out from the budget this week. You know, we know living standards are going to decline. We know growth is going to remain low. We know GDP per capita is going to remain pretty dismal as we go through to the end of this decade. I mean, it just seems to me as though this problem, this crisis for Labour is just going to become more and more entrenched.
She's really not done herself any favours at all by the way she's behaved over the past few weeks and the sort of mysterious government communication strategy of leaking random things and then U-turning on the things they've leaked on before we've even got to the budget. And as I say, normally governments try to conceal bad news and pretend that things are much better than they are. It's quite strange for people to conceal good news in the way that she's done. But I think at the very least, everyone will expect a very comprehensive explanation for why she behaved in the way they did. And people will make their own minds up as to whether her explanation satisfies them or whether they think it's time for her to go.
Well, thank you, Simon Hunt, for joining us, City Editor of City AM. I'm just going to bring in my panel now, political commentator Alice Grant and GB News contributor Kai Wilshaw. Kai, you hear there that actually there has been quite a bit of misleading going on, a bit of doublespeak, shall we say. Look at the timings here. It was made quite clear to Rachel Reeves early on that actually, you know, the numbers were there. She didn't need to go for 30 billion of tax rises. And I mean, it's looking quite serious tonight. I mean, looking at the national newspapers, they're all leading on this. This is going to be the crisis of the weekend, potentially the next week, potentially the rest of the winter.
No, Matt, that is nonsense, and you know it. I think Mel Stride and others are letting rhetoric outrun
Well, it's all over the national papers. It's leading
tomorrow it'll be, what is it, yesterday's fish paper. Look, that is a nonsense, right? Rachel Reeves undoubtedly was facing a calamitous state of the economy, calamitous public finances.
Yeah, but it wasn't as bad as she made out, was it? It wasn't as bad as she made out.
No, Matt. You and I and many people delight in telling people week in, week out how the state collapse is occurring everywhere you look in the UK. The finances are broken. Whether or not she was saved a little by the OBR's famously rubbish predictions is for the birds, honestly. The fact that she made that speech, it wasn't misleading at all. And maybe it was a bit of expectation management. You know, Simon said that she didn't lie. Maybe there was a bit of fiddling around the edges. But in the grand scheme of things, let's not get higher on our own supply, calling for people to resign when they're doing the best they can.
Alice Grant.
She absolutely should resign. This is shocking. I mean, to have misled the British public so much. How many times are we told there is this great black hole? That black hole, which obviously wasn't nearly as bad, is being used to justify punishing taxes, advancing a socialist agenda which will affect young people, affect families, drive people into poverty, affect our housing, welfare system. I mean, it's unforgivable, in my opinion, to have played so much on fear and on panic to try to just very stealthily and quite openly advance a socialist tax agenda after promising not to raise taxes on working people and after telling us that there's this massive black hole. I mean, so many lies.
There was before.
This government is a government of lies.
But the key point, Kai, is the black hole was nowhere near as big as the Chancellor suggested it was.
That's sort of exaggeration.
We would be in exactly the same situation as we were in the spring statement, in this next spring statement, and the budget to come.
Here's my prediction. This crisis is going to be enormous over the next few days. Watch this space. Justice Secretary David Lammy, meanwhile, wants jury trials to be reserved for murder, rape and manslaughter only. Does that put too much power in the hands of a few judges? We're going to be debating that question and whether actually we're losing something very, very important in Britain in just 1 minute.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries. All sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
The heavy rain across parts of Greece due to Storm Adele is now moving into Turkey. We could see some high rainfall totals building up. There's going to be some thunder mixed in, even some large hail as well. Further west, and a few bits of rain across the southern parts of Italy. Elsewhere, mostly dry. Much of Spain actually largely dry, similar for southern France. But some wet weather pushing into northwestern parts of Spain and also Portugal, and that will feed further southeastwards through the weekend.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. More rain is on its way during the next 24 hours, especially parts of England and Wales, whilst it's going to be clearer and a bit colder further north. We've had an unsettled day for the north of the UK in particular on Friday, but low pressure is clearing away. Behind it we've got a cold northerly wind, a frosty night to come for some parts of northern Scotland under clear spells, albeit with further showers coming into the far north. But elsewhere it's cloudy skies, some outbreaks of rain through Northern Ireland, southern Scotland. But here's the main event. Some very wet weather moving in through the night across England and Wales. A soggy start to Saturday. Frost-free, yes, but very wet in places, particularly through the southwest, Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia and the east of England as we begin the day. But that rain is edging its way eastwards. It's going to clear western and southwestern parts, albeit with showers following on behind. And we've got this showery system also affecting parts of Northern Ireland into southern Scotland. But away from there, plenty of fine weather on Saturday morning. Decent blue skies for the north and west of Scotland. A chilly start with frosty conditions here, but otherwise it's a fine day, and that's the best place to be basically throughout Saturday, because elsewhere it's going to be cloudy, a lot of showers around, or if not, some longer spells of wet weather, particularly for eastern England, and that's a slow to clear band of rain, so it could cause some issues as we go through Saturday afternoon. It then returns into northern England with some snow over the Pennines, but to the north, clearer and frostier, and certainly a frosty start to Sunday more widely across the UK, although we've still got this wind in the east of the UK with some outbreaks of showery rain first thing. That moves into the North Sea, plenty of sunshine follows just for one day, because after Sunday, decent sunny day, Monday brings yet more wet weather.
Decisions made in Washington aren't just shaping America, they're shaping Britain too. From migration to global security, from crime to health. Whatever happens in the White House today
will be felt in your town or city tomorrow.
That's why The Late Show is live from Washington, D.C.
Cutting through the politics to show you what it all means for Britain.
The Late Show live every night at midnight.
Only on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
no,
isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes and Co weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Friday Night with me, Matt Goodwin, on GB News. Now, under reforms proposed by Labour Justice Secretary David Lammy, juries would decide only murder, rape and manslaughter, and also a handful of what he calls public interest cases, while up to 75% of trials would be heard by a judge alone. Now, this week, Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick has brought to light a declaration from David Lammy from 2020 saying, "Jury trials are a fundamental part of our democratic settlement. Criminal trials without juries are a bad idea." I could not agree more. Well, the logic behind the proposals is to tackle a record Crown Court backlog that is nearing 80,000 cases. So is this overhaul a necessary reform or a dangerous mistake? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by former prisoner and justice journalist David Shipley. David, thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. Just tell us a bit about your take on this, because it seems to be quite a wholesale constitutional and judicial shift that's being tabled here?
I think it's a vast constitutional shift, and particularly it's concerning because, of course, there was nothing about this in the manifesto. And actually, Labour conducted their courts review, headed up by Brian Levison of the Levison inquiry fame, earlier this year. And what Lammy is now proposing is to go even further than that in terms of restricting the right to jury trial. And I think restricting jury trials to only what the government deems serious offences, i.e. murder, manslaughter and rape, is very, very excessive. You know, there are lots of crimes for which, you know, a person would feel it was very serious. They could be facing years in prison and they would hope to be in front of a jury. I think I'm particularly concerned about speech crimes, where I think juries are much more willing to acquit, and judges in front of cases all day and maybe have been through certain kinds of diversity training will be far more likely to just convict and convict and convict. So I think it's very disturbing.
So do you think essentially that the risk here is we're emboldening judges, we're sort of emboldening a kind of legal class, and we're removing the public element? I mean, just talk us through what you see as the main institutional problem with this.
Well, I should say I've also sat on juries as well, so I've had experience on that side. And I think my experience of all of that, of having been a defendant in court and having been on a jury, is that jurors take it incredibly seriously. Because a juror probably only sits on maybe one or two trials in their whole life, they take it really seriously. They really pay attention to the evidence. They really they have to be convinced that someone's guilty. And with the best will in the world, a judge who sees case after case each day is not going to treat it in that way. It will just be another crime, another case, another trial. And I think juries exist really as a bulwark against judges just finding people guilty. They exist as a bulwark against tyranny as well, because there's been examples of times in our history where Parliament even has passed tyrannical laws which juries have failed to convict on. Really a good example is during the Commonwealth, when we didn't have a king. The Parliament made adultery punishable by the death penalty, and the conviction rate was incredibly low because, by and large, juries were not prepared to send people to the gallows for adultery. And that is actually the power of juries. They can stop bad law from taking effect and keep people in jail.
But just to go back to that point about democratic consent, this was not in the Labour Party manifesto, much like digital ID was not in the Labour Party manifesto. Sweeping tax rises were not in the Labour Party manifesto. Chagos Islands was not in the Labour Party manifesto. Could go on and on and on. There is something here about the violation of our very delicate social contract between politicians and the people that they are supposed to represent.
There is, and I think I'd add to that actually the assisted dying, decriminalising abortion up to birth. These are huge changes in settled matters which have been brought in or are being brought in without ever having been in the manifesto, and really just being introduced because Labour have a huge majority and feel they can do what they want. And that is actually really egregious. But also I think it does mean that they have opened these matters up for debate, and when a new government comes in, presumably in 2029, it should consider all of these matters entirely under its control, and it should feel entirely empowered to do what it wants with them, because Labour have clearly torn up the constitutional approach that we normally take to these sorts of things.
Well, thank you for joining us, David Shipley there, former prisoner and justice journalist. I'm just going to bring back the panel, Kai Wilshaw and Alice Grant. Kai, does this trouble you, the removal of juries to this extent? There is something here that feels to me fundamentally un-British about what is happening.
Yes, and actually Tyrone Steele, writing in Tribune on this issue from Justice, says, rightly so, that this is a constitutional legacy that's actually shared across the political spectrum. And eroding this trial by jury would lead to authoritarian justice. So it does trouble me. It is a democratic guardrail, it always has been. I don't think we'll land there, because what you've seen every time that a government has tried to get rid of juries, in 2007 they tried to do it on a narrow number of fraud cases, complex fraud cases. The House of Lords threw it out into the wilderness. Not going to happen. But also, this is just slightly different notes, right? This idea that a manifesto has to serve as both a crystal ball, imagining every event that might happen in a government's future, but also a comprehensive document that gives you a litany of different things that the government is going to do, a completely, historical record of what's going to happen in the next 5 years is for the Burs as well. Isn't it?
There is a convention.
I look forward to the reforms like the Bible.
There is a convention, right? That what is in the manifesto essentially is acted on. Alice Grant.
I think what I find so awful about this especially, not just the fact that it's an affront to our constitution and to such an integral part of our legal heritage, which is trial by jury, it's that Lammy knows full well, and the Levinson Review made clear, that juries aren't the reason why we have such a crumbling criminal justice system, that's because of a lack of funding, lack of legal aid, lack of court sitting days and judges. It's got nothing to do with juries, and yet to use that as an excuse to attack and to undermine our British constitution, which we all care about so much, and which provides so much more than just being, an old rule and an old ancient part of our heritage, but actually is so fundamentally important for democracy, for people feeling involved in our justice system, and for feeling as though they're taking part in the administration of justice and having a voice in that respect.
Well, we do have a right of reply from the Ministry of Justice. I'm just going to read this out. No final decision has been taken by government. We have been clear there is a crisis in the courts causing pain and anguish to victims, with 78,000 cases in the backlog and rising, which will require bold action to put right. Well, judges maintain they act impartially and in strict accordance with the established rules and standards governing their decisions. Now, over in America, Donald Trump has halted immigration from all what he calls third world countries after an Afghan migrant has shot 2 National Guards, tragically killing one of them. Should Britain follow suit with Donald Trump's visa ban? We'll be debating that in 1 minute.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight talking show where all voices are heard.
And, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk now?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
The fact is Trump made a good start, no.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up?
About 10. So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You want to know what's really going on in the corridors of power? Labour don't know what to do with you half the time, and that makes you quite lethal in the chamber. Get behind the headlines with Chopper's political podcast. Join me, Christopher Hope, as I sit down with the great and the good of British politics. We'll see where this ruling takes us. These are the stories shaping our nation. Chopper's political podcast, available now on all platforms. Listen in and stay ahead.
Britain deserves a newsroom that puts the facts and your voice first.
Well, and that's what you get on GB News. Lively debates, lively conversation.
And we're not afraid to hold power to account.
And each other. So join me, Andrew Pierce.
And me, Miriam Gates, for Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 on GB News.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/your say. There, you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/your say, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Friday Night with me, Matt Goodwin, on GB News, the People's Channel. Now it's time for Matt in Conversation. As the US Department of Justice is upgrading charges for the Afghan man suspected of shooting and killing a National Guard member and wounding another. Tragic news out of America. Now, President Donald Trump has said that he is going to permanently pause migration from all third world countries. And this was posted online on Thanksgiving. And the US president said that he and all federal benefits and subsidies, he will end all federal benefits and subsidies to non-citizens. Now, the suspect is a 29-year-old Afghan national who was only granted asylum earlier this year, according to CNN. And I want to ask this question: is it time for us to do the same as America? Should Britain now ban Afghan migrants and review all refugee claims to keep our country safe? Well, to discuss this with me tonight in the studio is international journalist and chief international anchor at IMI Media Group, Hadley Gamble. Hadley, thank you for joining us. Swift action from President Trump.
Absolutely.
Some people say going too far. What's your take?
Well, everyone's always going to say too far when it comes to President Trump. But at the end of the day, we're always begging for our leaders to take decisive action. And then suddenly when they do, we're worried about how decisive it actually is. Possibly it went too far. But at the end of the day, one would hope that they're checking who comes into the United States, that they're checking who comes into Great Britain, and looking at that with not just a quick glance. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about 76,000 Afghans that have entered the United States as a direct result of Joe Biden's botched departure from Afghanistan. Those people certainly have an axe to grind, as they should. But at the end of the day as well, we need to worry about who's in our country. And we need to understand as well, what are the expectations that these folks are going to be living under? I mean, we're giving them access to so many things: freedom of speech, opportunity, gender equality. It isn't like we're not giving a great gift, and it ought to be appreciated.
Just to be clear, nobody's really screening and controlling who's coming into the UK. I feel like I should clarify that point for you. But there is a fascinating thing here. You have President Trump responding to this by saying, look, we're going to suspend all visas for people coming in from so-called third world countries. We had a young British man, Thomas Roberts, murdered by an illegal migrant from Afghanistan. A very shocking case. The response of our leaders was to import thousands more people from Afghanistan while gagging the press and not telling people what was going on. And I just think these radically two different approaches are now so unavoidable. It seems to me as though President Trump is perhaps closer to public opinion than Keir Starmer.
Well, at least half the country elected him. But at the end of the day, also look at the fact that here in the United Kingdom, you do mention the press, so much pushback as to whether or not these things should be not just in the public eye, but a matter of even conversation. I know in my own field, you bring this up in a newsroom and you get chased out of the newsroom. You're not allowed to talk about these things because it hits so many nerves and so many buttons. But this is a conversation that people are having on the street. And the more that you ignore what happens on the street, the bigger the pushback is. All I ever hear at these Western sort of security conferences that I attend and moderate is, oh, we're so terrified about the rise in populist governments, far-right governments. Where did they think that comes from? It comes from people feeling as if they've not been listened to, they've not been heard. So the more that you continue to do that, the more you're going to see people pushing toward the right.
I mean, I've said this for many years. If you don't want to have, so-called populist governments taking power, then deal with the underlying issues. But they don't
have the conversation. Don't hide it under the rug. I mean, it doesn't help anyone.
Or just control the borders.
Yeah.
Just stop killers and murderers coming into Western countries. I mean, that would be a start. Screen people who are coming in. But listen, thank you, Hadley, for your thoughts tonight. We have to move on because after Friday Night with Matt Goodwin, it's Patrick Christis tonight. Now, he's coming up after me with his show. Patrick, just tell us, what have you got coming up for everybody at home tonight?
Well, thank you very much, Matt. I'm joined here by my live studio audience. Hello, everybody. Fantastic. What a night for it, hey? So it looks as though this is the most deceitful government in history, right? Rachel Reeves has basically been caught making up a £30 billion black hole. She can use that as the excuse to tax you all more and then give it all away in welfare. I mean, probably the biggest lie since the Iraq War, this. Is absolutely shocking, so we're going to be talking about all of that. Sir Keir Starmer was caught telling the truth for once, though, when he said that we have no deterrent in the Channel. No deterrent. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, we all knew that, didn't we? So thank you very much for that, Keir. Two-child benefit cap. Anyone in favour of lifting the two-child benefit cap? No? All right. Well, maybe we'll talk about that as well. We've got all of that coming your way and loads more as well. Also, should Nigel boycott the BBC? Apparently, makeup artists are smearing bodily fluids into his face. Seriously. Yes, all of that and much more. I know, shocking. See you in a bit. See you in a bit. All right.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. More rain is on its way during the next 24 hours, especially parts of England and Wales, whilst it's going to be clearer and a bit colder further north. We've had an unsettled day for the north of the UK in particular on Friday, but low pressure is clearing away. Behind it we've got a cold northerly wind, a frosty night to come for some parts of northern Scotland under clear spells, albeit with further showers coming into the far north. But elsewhere it's cloudy skies, some outbreaks of rain through Northern Ireland, southern Scotland. But here's the main event. Some very wet weather moving in through the night across England and Wales. A soggy start to Saturday. Frost-free, yes, but very wet in places, particularly through the southwest, Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia and the east of England as we begin the day. But that rain is edging its way eastwards. It's going to clear western and southwestern parts, albeit with showers following on behind. And we've got this showery